What was that?
Perfume bottle through the mirror.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Gregg Rotenberg, who is the CEO of Smart Wires. And Smart Wires is an electrical and electronics company that specializes in grid optimization that leverages its patent modular power flow control technology. Gregg, welcome to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you guys have a very, long kind of a history and genesis in terms of dating back to the inventions at Georgia Tech University that's really developed this smart power flow control concept to enhance the flexible alternating current transmission system to make energy grids more efficient. I think what I wanted to hope to focus a little bit is if you could tell us a little bit about what is Smart Wire, and specifically in the current kind of transition that we're in as we're starting to mix in more of the renewables and distributed decentralized grid model, how you guys are helping to allow for utilities to be more flexible, more versatile, and to have more greater capacity.
Great. Smart Wires is a power electronics company that has devised a method of getting a lot more transfer capacity out of today's transmission grids. If I can oversimplify this a bit, what we're doing is taking advantage of all those transmission lines that are rarely utilized. As most of us learned in our high school physics, electricity more or less follows the path of least resistance. And what that means is even during the peak times on the grid, very few of the lines are actually utilized to their full capacity. Think of Smart Wires as a valve. We in fact call it a smart valve that is installed on various lines, and it's either pushing the power off of the lines that are overloaded or pulling the power down the lines that are underloaded. The net impact is you get 20 to 40% more transfer capacity out of your utility grid. That's so important today because, as you know, we're going through a critically important energy transition. We'd all like to move to greener, lower carbon solutions for our grid. Our challenge is we don't want to pay a lot more in our utility bills in order to get there. So in order to move to these low-cost renewables, which are in fact lower cost than the other solutions in the marketplace, we need to find a way to do that without building lots of new transmission lines. And that's what Smart Wires allows you to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when we think about utilities, the infrastructure is so vast and so expensive. So having to invest new equipment is always a daunting issue. And I'll talk a little bit about how utilities tend to kind of function. That's not typically innovation driven. So here you're basically using the analogy of traffic, commute or traffic. It's the optimization of thoroughfare. It's making sure that certain pathway that is less used, there's more traffic going there. And if, there's too much traffic going one side, you try to, reroute it so that there's less, less overcapacity. So it's using what's already there just in a smarter way. And especially as we transition to renewables, storage and, having that consistency regardless of the variability of the wind, solar PV and so forth becomes hypercritical. Can you talk a little bit about Smart Valve and how it's changed since the days of, the research to where it is today?
Well, it's come quite a long way. So I've been at Smart Wires for almost 7 years now. And when we first arrived, we had a rather clever device that would, almost like a metal tube, that would clip onto the lines in 6 minutes. It was a creative solution to overloaded power lines. It didn't solve the problem of underloaded power lines. And our biggest challenge was it was solving a fairly small problem. It worked well on very low voltage, very low current lines. And while that should have been an attractive solution to the utilities, what they told us in that first year is that you're solving a small problem for us, and we're so busy and so challenged by our grid, we just don't have time to use our resources learning a better way to solve a small problem. So ironically, we had to build a solution to their big problems in order for them to truly engage, which took taking that device and making it larger and way more powerful. So today's device does the work of 650 of that original device. Now we're solving huge problems for utilities, which is why they're so engaged. Often I share with people who are interested the work we're doing in the UK just this year and the impact we're having. That's when they start to appreciate the magnitude. Would it be interesting for me to share just a little about that?
Yes, absolutely.
So just the projects we're doing this year, it's 5 projects in the UK for a company called National Grid, who's one of the 3 most respected utilities in the world. Just our projects this year will add 1.5 gigawatts of incremental transfer capacity to the grid. Even larger impact next year with the projects they've got planned. The projects this year, which will cost around $25 million to implement, save the UK consumers over $350 million a year.
Yeah, that's quite astounding. I think the story you just shared is fascinating because as you know, utility companies typically don't move, right? Unless it's a regulatory or compliance-driven initiative, they're really not going to be buying into anything new. But in this case, this is so critical to their very viability, and then of course utilities being, on top of that, being burned by the likes of natural disasters. So in the case of California, even being legally liable for wildfires, for example, they're already under a tremendous amount of governmental policy, but also financial stress. So you guys are solving a big, big problem. How do you guys typically work with utilities, and what are the kind of uniqueness in working with utilities, both kind of in the UK example, but also outside?
So we're typically involved with utilities very early on in their planning process, which is a bit different than the other players in our industry. Most of the large players in this world, the large OEMs, will work with utilities once they've identified the challenges on their grid, they've designed and specified exactly what kind of solution they need. SmartWires is such a new solution for them to take advantage of these underutilized transmission lines that they're actually asking us to engage far earlier in the process. They're inviting us in now and saying, I've got this problem. I've got a lot of generation in power area in this area A. I need to get it to area B, and I can't build new transmission lines. Either they're too expensive, or more often, I just can't get the permitting to get those new lines, and I need this done right away. Are you able to help us reroute the power throughout their grid in a way to bring the power to where it's needed? And that's exactly what we do. We have a solution and analytics team that will partner with their best grid experts, study their grid together, and figure out exactly where on their grid we can place our equipment to move the power from where it can be generated to where it needs to be used.
I think one area that I want to explore, again, I don't know if it's part of your script, but is this notion of storage. So first of all, transmission is highly inefficient in the sense of energy dissipates as it travels through the transmission line. So rerouting and optimization of pathways is one thing, but when we think about especially renewable energy and moving to decarbonization, being able to actually, maintain the electricity that travels become hyper important. So while we think about storage and batteries in the context of next to, let's say, solar PV farms or wind farms, how can batteries play a role within the transmission lines?
So we're big fans of storage. We think it's critically important that we move to a world that's more efficient at building and incorporating storage into our grids. There is one challenge that we run into almost every day with utilities and regulators across the world, which is there's so much excitement around storage. There's multi-billion dollar companies pursuing that space. They have a lot of money to pay lobbyists to form groups and build excitement around storage, which is terrific. The challenge is you're usually way better off utilizing your grid to its full potential before you turn to storage. So if you look at most of the projects that are out there in the marketplace today, they're usually solving a 4 to 6 hour need where they can't get power to a certain area for some number of hours. The right way to solve those problems almost always is to make full use of your grid first, then add storage if you can't get the power you need to where it's needed. And what we find is that most of the time today, you actually can get the power you need to the right location at the time you need it. Again, most power grids throughout the world are not utilizing 20 to 40% of their capacity. Think about how high an impact it is to add 30% incremental capacity to a grid. You probably don't need storage yet. You will when we get to 80 or 90% renewables, but you probably don't need it today.
Yeah, I think that's a fair analysis and assessment of the situation. Is that something like such a large infrastructure like this, you really want to squeeze out the maximum efficiency before looking to add on additional capex. So it makes perfect sense. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of dynamics as more solar PV farms come online? You have more rooftop solar, and they're not only kind of reducing the strain on the grid, but also giving back surplus or net metering back to the system. How are you guys playing in that role?
Yeah, there are a couple different vectors happening simultaneously in the question you asked, because in some ways, solar is very valuable to the utility, right? You have the ability to build utility scale solar farms, which is a very low cost way of generating energy. You have homeowners and businesses putting solar on their roof, which can take away the peak need of electricity, which is very valuable to the utility as well. On the other side of the coin, though, Scott, is the fact that it's very difficult to predict when those solar farms will come online and how many houses in each neighborhood will put the solar panels on their roof. And that lack of predictability is a nightmare for our customers. When they can't determine with accuracy what their needs will be 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, let alone the 30-year visibility they have had for many, many decades, it makes it very difficult for them to run a grid. That is driving a lot of our growth. The grids are changing so fast, and more utilities throughout the world are running into situations they call urgent. They're having brownouts, blackouts in neighborhoods and sections of the city. They need a quick solution to get more transfer capacity across their grid. And they frequently tell us, you're the only solution we can look at. No other solution can be implemented in a few months to change how their grid looks. The fastest way they've been able to change the configuration of their grid previously was a 3 to 4 year project. When we show them our equipment, which is now mobile, and we can install it in 4 hours, they start to see how valuable it is. They can actually change the topology of their grid in just a few hours. That's game changing to these utilities.
So I know that you, prior to coming on board with SmartWire, was with Chevron's Renewable Power Group, and of course, you helped grow a very large business unit there. And since you've been with SmartWire, it's growing. And to your point, there's a kind of macroeconomic kind of landscape that is really just ideal for where you guys are. So I got to believe your organization is really ready for even further exponential growth. What are you thinking in terms of kind of the next stage for you guys? What are your top priorities?
Our number one priority is make every one of our customers successful. We've shipped more MVAR, which is how this unit judges the impact you've had on the grid. We've shipped more MVAR in the first few months of this year than we did the previous 10 years combined. The growth is exponential, Scott, and the key is to make every customer successful every time. This is a very small industry. These utilities, who for many decades weren't the least bit competitive with each other, some of them in some markets are starting to become a bit competitive with each other now. They form such great working relationships that they share insights constantly. That type of setup makes it so critical for us to make every customer successful and every customer a highly referenceable fan of the company. And we walk around every day saying, that's the most important thing we need to do. The speed of growth of this company will be entirely dependent on how successful we make our customers.
Yeah, agree. Now, in terms of looking at your revenue model, aside from selling the actual physical assets in terms of units to the utilities, at some point, I got to believe that your company is really positioned to be a data company. Can you speak to that and what that means from a monetization opportunity?
The data is interesting and is a great opportunity. That's a fairly long-term vision for us. It would be hard for me to overstate how big the opportunity is just from selling and renting the equipment to these customers. Utilities buy around $100 billion of equipment each year, and we've carefully calculated we're highly advantaged in 14 billion of that $100 billion each year, which tells you this would be a fairly large company, assuming we just capture a significant portion of the market. There's a new study that just came out of Germany, which validated by one of the most prestigious experts there, we're 4 times more effective than their next best solution. So taking away all the speed advantages, all the flexibility advantages, just on an impact basis, we're 4 times more effective than the best solution they've ever had. So we are pretty excited about the near-term solution. The data that is available, you have to recognize, is also owned by those utilities. Ultimately, they own that data. We get access to the data to optimize our equipment, but we work hand in hand with our customers such that we're only using their data in the most appropriate way. You're absolutely right. The data is going to provide insights, and long-term is going to allow us to be much more efficient in how we run power grids. But the exact monetization of that, we believe, is at least 5, if not 10 years away.
Understood. Well, very exciting indeed. A great time for you guys. Very, great opportunity. I do agree that the exponential growth is going to be very much in front of you. So with that, I've been joined by Gregg Rotenberg, who is the CEO of SmartWires. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.